My reflection for this morning is based upon our reading from John's Gospel, chapter 15, and verses 9 to 17. And it reflects something of the sort of work of Christian Aid as we look forward to this being Christian Aid Week. And as we consider these words of Jesus that John records for us here in chapter 15, we know that Jesus is moving closer to the cross. And so we could see these words, if you like, as something of a final debrief with the disciples. What he says in these chapters, and here in chapter 15, these words are, if you like, if you forget everything else, you must remember this, words of Jesus. If you forget everything else, whatever you do, don't forget this command. And that's what we see here in John 15. Jesus says, obey my command, which is simple, straightforward, easy to remember. 3 little words. That's all. Love one another. Or we might say, love your neighbor. And we say them in our service week in, week out. Love your neighbor. And yet I wonder how often, as we think of this command, we can find ourselves slipping into what we might term sort of a self-justification mode. And we say things like, well, I don't need to love them. I know I should love them, but that doesn't mean I have to do anything for them. Can't we just like each other, but keep each other at arm's length? And surely we don't have to love our brothers and sisters who we can't see. And we rationalize this command to suit our want or our not want. Jesus tells us one key thing. He explains it to us. He shows us what it looks like with his own life. And yet we can too quickly think, well, does it really matter? Does it really make a difference? Is it really that important? Let me tell you a story just to illustrate, hopefully bring a smile. Mrs. Smith was a kind and gentle lady, and she lived on her own. And she volunteered for Christian Aid through the week. And she was trying to get someone to come and fix her dishwasher. And so she called the repairman, but unfortunately, he said he couldn't come in an evening when Mrs. Smith was home. So she said, don't worry, that's okay. I'll leave my key under the mat. If you can let yourself in, fix the dishwasher, leave the bill on the counter, and I'll put a check in the post. Fine, said the repairman, that's okay. And Mrs. Smith said, by the way, don't worry about Brutus, the Rottweiler. He won't bother you if you don't bother him. But, she said, whatever you do, do not under any circumstances talk to the parrot. Well, thought the repairman, that doesn't sound too difficult. 5 little words, don't talk to the parrot. Nice and simple. So he arrived the next day, and sure enough, there lying on the mat in front of the fire was the biggest and the meanest looking Rottweiler he had ever seen. But, like Mrs. Smith said, it just lay there, didn't do a thing, no worry at all. However, sat on a perch above the television was a parrot. And this parrot was just so rude. It drove the repairman nuts with its cursing, its yelling, its name calling. It was just awful. And on it went, swearing at him, calling him names, being utterly horrid. And finally, the repairman thought, I'm just not putting up with this. Surely what the old lady said isn't that important. Surely it's not going to worry if I just say something to this bird. What harm could there be in ignoring Mrs. Smith's advice? So the repairman said, "Why don't you just shut up, you stupid, ugly bird?" Well, the parrot went silent, said absolutely nothing. And the repairman thought, that's it, sorted. Carried on with the job. He finished doing the dishwasher. And then just as he was packing up his tools, the parrot let out a shrill whistle. Brutus stirred. And the parrot shouted, "Get him, Brutus." It's very easy, almost too easy, for us to convince ourselves that these things that we're told to do, that Jesus commands us to do as his children, these underlying principles of our faith, it's too easy to convince ourselves, well, we don't really need to do them. They're not really that important, are they? Love one another. Is it really that important? Well, according to Jesus, the answer appears to be yes. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Unconditionally, sacrificially, and from the heart. And in the same way, you are to love one another. And Jesus reminds us that this is not an option, nor is it limited to those who we know personally, to those who we see week by week, or those who we choose, but it is a command to love all God's children, whoever and wherever they are. A bit like Florence in Kenya, who has suffered loss, who has faced hardship, and yet who sends us a blessing. As we think about Christian Aid Week, we tend to think of the envelope through the door and our scrabbling around for some loose change to put in. But this year, maybe, when it's a bit more difficult to deliver envelopes and we might not get one, maybe this year, we might give a bit more prayerful consideration to this command of Jesus. Love one another with a selfless, sacrificial love. And maybe that might challenge us to consider how we might not just support the ministry here at home, but how we might be generous in our support for our sisters and brothers around the world. And that motivated by love, we might consider our support for the work of God's kingdom, of which the work of Christian Aid is a part. Amen. Now, I'll put some details up about Christian Aid in a moment, later on in our service, but also there is some information up on the St. Mary's website, and I'm sure if you go to Christian Aid Direct, you can find out more information there, how you can give to support their work, and how you can choose which of their projects you would like to support.